I believe confidence is not something you manufacture through willpower. I believe confidence is something that emerges when your nervous system feels safe and when you can teach your body that visibility can be safe, slowly, gently, and one micro moment at a time. The collective trauma carries forward, not just in our stories, but in our bodies. Today, we're going to talk about why being seen feels like a threat, what's actually happening in your body when visibility activates your nervous system, and where this wound really actually comes from. Because, spoiler alert, it didn't start with you.
Sabrosura pa' ti que.
You're about to unmute yourself on the Zoom call. Your idea is solid. You have rehearsed it 3 times. And you know what you're going to and what you need to say. But the second your hand hovers over that button, your throat tightens, your heart races, your mind goes blank. And you think, "Ooh, maybe someone else should say it. Maybe I'll sound stupid. Maybe I'm too nervous and I'll just hesitate. Maybe it would be too much, maybe not enough. Who do I think I am anyway?" So you stay muted. You type your idea in the chat instead, and someone else reads it out loud, and everyone loves it. And you sit there thinking, why couldn't I just say it? Here's what I invite you to process. This is not a confidence problem. This is your visibility wound. Because your body learned very, very early, very, very clearly that being seen is dangerous, that speaking up invites criticism, that visibility costs you safety. And until you understand that this is happening to your nervous system, not just to your mind, you're going to keep white knuckling your way through presentations while your body screams, danger, danger, danger. It's going to be an alert system just telling you it's dangerous. Today, we're going to talk about why being seen feels like a threat, what's actually happening in your body when visibility activates your nervous system, and where this wound really actually comes from. Because, spoiler alert, it didn't start with you. Soy Pam Covarrubias. This is Café con Pam. Let's do this. So, your visibility wounds are not about lacking confidence. They're about your nervous system that learned being seen equals being criticized, judged, or even abandoned. And when cultural trauma lives in visibility, when you've been taught that good girls stay quiet, that speaking up is disrespectful, or that your accent marks you as other, your body's threat response is not necessarily that you're losing your mind. Your body's threat response, it's actually smart. It's intelligent. It's working for you. And the work is not to just be more confident. The work is to give your nervous system a new information. It's to give your nervous system new data, which is being seen can be safe. So that's what we're going to explore today. And in the next episode, in 2 weeks episode, I'm going to give you some practical steps to start teaching your body this truth. Pero primero, we need to understand what's actually happening. This is part 1 of 2. So I'm breaking this episode into 2 because there's so much information that I think it's important for us to break it down first and then move into the second part. So, what exactly is the visibility wound? In my body of work, my methodologies, I talk about the 5 wounds of Calladita Culture. And if you're new here, Calladita Culture is a conditioning that taught first-generation women like us to stay small, to stay silent, to be compliant. Not because our parents meant harm. It's never to blame our parents or grandparents or whoever. It's because silence was literally how they survived. And one of the 5 wounds is the wound of worth. Usually, it shows up as struggles with value and visibility. And this is what happens when you learn that being seen meant being judged. When you internalize the message that taking up space was actually dangerous. When you figure out, probably before you could even name it, that the safest version of you was the smallest version of you. I know. And here's the thing. This wound doesn't show up as I have low self esteem. It shows up as over preparing, as rehearsing what you're going to say 47 times before your meeting, as waiting to feel ready before you raise your hand, before you ask for the promotion, before you ask for more money. Except that ready, I was going to say never comes, but ready has, you always have been ready. It also shows up as knowing your idea is good, but you still look around the room to see if someone else will say it first. This is not a confidence gap, it's a visibility wound. So, the story of you're going to mute yourself that I started telling at the beginning, that was me. I was sitting at a meeting and there were a lot of people, very smart people in that meeting. And someone asked for feedback. And I was actually invited to be a mentor for a group of business owners. And the business owners would present their business and then we would give them feedback. And so I had ideas on how this business could improve in so many ways, but my throat started tightening, my mind was going blank, my heart started racing when I was about to unmute myself. And instead of speaking freely, I just still decided to unmute myself because I was kind of like, it was one of those like all the mentors went and everyone looked at me like, you have nothing else to say, or do you have anything to add? And finally, I was like, "Ugh, okay." And my comment was minimized by me, not even by others. And because when I decided to finally speak up at the end, I was so insecure and it felt over rehearsed and it just didn't feel like me. And knowing what I know is that my body was simply responding to what it perceived as a threat, which was not the fact that I didn't know or I was lacking knowledge, is that the environment that I was in was a threat for my body. So now let's talk about where this wound actually comes from, because we already know this. You didn't start it. If you grew up Latina, you probably heard some version of this phrase. Calladita te ves más bonita. You look prettier when you're quiet. And this is more than a refrán, this is more than a saying. It's a cultural script that's been passed down for literal generations. As author Esmeralda Aaron writes, Latinas have heard this phrase regardless of socioeconomic status, country of origin, or educational background. This phrase is embedded in the roots of Latin American culture. This idea that a woman's beauty is tied to her silence and compliance. And here's what's wild. This idea, this principle, goes way back. Historians note that even in pre Hispanic times, girls were raised to be, as one Franciscan missionary documented, quote, blind, deaf, and mute, end quote. The silencing of women is ancient, and your body carries that inheritance. But here's another layer, if that wasn't enough, especially for those of us who are first gens. Our parents taught us to stay under the radar because that's what kept them safe. Drawing attention could invite discrimination, being targeted, being told to, quote, go back where you came from, quote. For some families, visibility meant risk for deportation. For others, it meant social consequences. And I would say it still does to this day, more so now, the times that we are living in when I'm recording this, 2025. So invisibility became survival, and you inherited the nervous system template. It's a mold. And this is what researchers call intergenerational trauma. According to a scoping review published in Social Science and Medicine, Latinos, Latinas, Latines are particularly vulnerable to intergenerational trauma due to legacies of colonialism, political violence, and migration related stressors. The collective trauma carries forward, not just in our stories, but in our bodies. Dr. Rachel Rehuda's research on international transmission of trauma shows how a parent's fear can literally become a child's nervous system baseline. So when you freeze before speaking up, it's not your body responding simply to this moment. It's your body responding to generations of data points that we have in our bodies that say being seen is not safe. So don't take it as weakness. It's simply biology meeting history. It's data. The body, I've been saying this, it always goes back to the familiar. It's biology meeting history. And here's another piece of this that I want to make sure I name, because for many of us, visibility is not just about being seen, it's also about being heard. It's about how we sound. Gloria Ansaldúa, the brilliant Chicana scholar that we all know about, and if you don't, please go do some research, wrote about something she called linguistic terrorism. Terrorism. Speaking of linguistic terrorism, in her book Borderlands La Frontera, she described how Chicano Spanish, and frankly, any language that's not standard English, gets attacked, delegitimized, and that is how we internalize the attack. But when she wrote about being scolded for her accent, being told her Spanish wasn't proper enough, being corrected and criticized for how she spoke. And she named what that creates: low self esteem, shame, and a diminished sense of self. So, if you've ever been corrected on your pronunciation, mocked for your accent, or told, quote, speak English, your nervous system learned how you sound determines whether you are safe. So every time you speak up, there's an underlining calculation happening in your brain, in your body, saying, will my voice mark me as other, as less than, as not belonging here? And this happens even among ourselves. Research from the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley shows that young Latina adults experience linguistic terrorism from both English speakers and Spanish speakers. They're told their English isn't American enough and told their Spanish isn't Mexican or brown enough. And as we know, they're caught in between worlds. We all are. So when you hesitate before speaking up, there's a part of you calculating which version of myself is safe to show, which accent is acceptable here, and which words are they going to understand. This happens to me often. This is why sometimes I say things in Espanol because I mean, that's how they come. And I know the people that listen to me, and I'm focused on my listener, whom I know will understand the few words here and there. But if I'm in a corporate meeting, if I am in a different space, it's different. It's the safety piece gets a little bit more reduced depending on the environment. And it's not imposter phenomenon. Maybe it is. The way that I see it is the weight of navigating multiple worlds while your nervous system tries to keep you safe in all of them. It's a lot. It's a lot. We all know this. Talking about money is not always the most comfortable. Pero our friends from Savvy Ladies make it easier, and now in Espanol. You don't have to feel the pressure to translate for your mamá or your tías because Savvy Ladies has their whole site en nuestro idioma. Y ahora they can easily access their free resources like talleres, clases, y mi favorita es la línea gratis para enviar preguntas. Their free financial helpline en donde puedes conectar with a trusted financial expert. Whether you need financial guidance in English or in Espanol, Savvy Ladies is here to support you. Visit savvyladies.org, that is SAVVYLADIES.org, para empezar your financial freedom. If you've started making your cafecitos at home to get on with that morning routine and build the habit of saving money, it could be a good strategy. Pero there might be an easier way to save. Did you know that if you open a new savings builder account at BMO, you can earn a $5 reward every month you grow your balance by $200 or more during the first year. Learn more about how BMO can help you grow your savings by visiting bmo.com/save. bmo.com/save. Conditions apply. Accounts provided in the United States by BMO Bank and a member FDIC. Okay, so now that we understand where this comes from, let's talk about what's actually happening in your body when visibility feels threatening. Because here's what most confidence work gets wrong. It treats this like a mindset problem. Just think positive, fake it till you make it. Believe in yourself, meh. But you can't think your way out of your nervous system response. Dr. Stephen Porges developed something called polyvagal theory that explains this. Before his work, we mostly understood the stress response as fight or flight. When you face a threat, you either fight it or you run from it. Pero Dr. Stephen identified a third response. Dr. Porges identified a third response: freeze. And this is what happens when fighting seems dangerous and fleeing isn't an option. Your nervous system essentially shuts down. It's a survival mechanism, one of the most ancient ones we have. And here's how it works in a visibility moment. Primero, your amygdala, our alarm system, the threat detector in our brain, picks up potential danger. And I do this every time I talk about the amygdala because I imagine I don't know, this like flag almost that's always constantly looking at scanning all the information. It's like a scanner. That's the way that I imagine the amygdala. And so our friend the amygdala picks up on potential danger. And one thing to note and or remember is that the amygdala loves historical data. The amygdala loves going through the archives and saying, what does this feel familiar to? And that data for the amygdala says that being seen equals being judged. Número dos, your sympathetic nervous system activates. That is your fight or flight. This is when your heart rate increases, when your breathing gets shallow, when your body prepares to respond to a threat. Because remember, the body doesn't know that it's not a bear chasing you or that is simply a notification that you just received. For the body, it's the familiar feeling of history that it's connecting it to. Here's the issue. You can't fight your way through a team meeting and you can't run out of a presentation. So what happens? You freeze. Your nervous system hits the brakes so hard you feel immobile. You feel like you cannot move. And Dr. Porges calls this dorsal vagal shutdown. It's your body's last resort survival strategy. And here's a piece that explains so much. When you're in dorsal vagal shutdown, your prefrontal cortex, your decision thinking, your planning, your articulating part of your brain literally says, I'm out. That's the part of the brain. In psychology, they call it when your hood gets lifted. So basically, this part is like, I'm going on vacation, offline, shut down, done. And you literally cannot access your words. It's happened to me many times. And that's why you can rehearse something perfectly 30 times and then go completely blank in the meeting. Because it's not that you forgot, it's that the part of the brain that holds the words simply took a break. And that's how your nervous system perceives this threat. So I have a client story of one of my clients who, in her case, instead of being silent, because, the 5 wounds of Calladita culture, you could be underdeveloped in them or overcompensated. And in her case, she was on the overside. So she would over-prepare to the point where she would tell me that she would go into this meeting and she had literal stacks of emails and she would come with receipts for everything because she held a pretty high title in the company that she worked at. And in case somebody needed to come after her, she needed to bring all the receipts. So she was over prepared. And as she would be in these meetings and people would question, then she would fiddle through the paper, like the over preparing of notes and papers and things that she brought in. She would completely lose the actual, like, she didn't need to have paper to prove her work. But she became this over prepared because her body would go into freeze and she would forget. Her mind would go blank. And then she would be like, I have no data. I have no evidence of the work that I have done, because her brain is just like out. When we worked through her body response and when we did some exercises to make sure that her safety piece, first and foremost, was addressed, that's when she realized it wasn't that she was failing. It wasn't that she wasn't smart enough. It wasn't that she didn't know enough. It wasn't that she wasn't prepared. It's simply that it was her nervous system responding. And so when she understood that this wasn't about her competence, then right before a meeting, she was able to do some exercises to make sure that she was calm. We did so much. And we also worked on her certainty, because we needed to create new evidence in her brain to let her brain know that this meeting, that it was like a weekly meeting that the team had, was not a you're gonna die threat. It was simply a check-in. It was simply a how's your team doing with this project? And she simply had to say a very simple report. Are you in progress? Are you stuck? Do you need help with anything? Those were like literally the questions. And so once she was able to tune into the foundation of where she didn't feel safe, we were able to go into her subconscious to explore where that feeling of unsafety came from. She was 6 years old when something happened in her life. And then we were able to shift that, to reprogram that from a subconscious level. And then adult self was able to show up to those meetings in a very different way, because the evidence that her brain had, the amygdala was no longer going back to that moment when the traumatic thing happened, saying, see, when you speak up, you're not safe, you get in trouble. So that was a really cool transformation that we were able to achieve by creating awareness around, first and foremost, the body. Your body is simply responding. And then we explored why this happened, and she chose to rewrite the story and give her body safety so she could show up in the best way possible. And now she runs the meetings, and I'm like, who are you? When she tells me about it, it's great. So now, for first gen folks and anyone navigating multiple cultural contexts, there's an additional layer here that compounds everything we've talked about. And this is what we all know. It's called code switching. And according to the Society of Human Resource Management, 66% of Latinos report having to code switch at work. More than half, 66% of us have to code switch at work. This means we have to adjust our language, our behavior, and our presentation based on who we are with. But here's what the research also shows: code switching is cognitively exhausting. A study published in the journal Effective Science found that sustained code switching adds significant cognitive load and reinforces what they called, quote, self-productive, quote, behavior. The researchers noted that code switching leads to reduced opportunities for authentic self-presentation, increased emotional effort, and stress. So, when you're about to speak up in a meeting, you're not just deciding what to say, you're deciding how to say it, which version of yourself is safe to show, and which references will land. How many of you have had El Chavo del Ocho in your head and you're in a meeting, you're like, yeah, nobody's gonna get it. And so then you have to switch to like an English show, which I never have them. So I just don't bring any references, but it's exhausting. Also, you may think whether your accent is noticed, whether you're going to pronounce words good, I'm pretty sure I've done so many mispronunciations today, just like that. And it is what it is. The constant translation exhausts your nervous system before you even open your mouth. There's a lot of thinking and processing we have to do before we even act on it. And that's when your nervous system feels so depleted. Because when you're already under resourced, when you're already tired, then it's so much easier for your body to tip into freeze. It's so much easier for your body to be like, let me just eh, freeze. There's no more energy there. And this is why visibility feels so much harder for us. We're not just managing the moment, we're managing centuries of conditioning, intergenerational patterns, linguistic navigation, and cultural translation, todo al mismo tiempo, all in real time, all while trying to make a point about Q3 projections. No wonder your throat closes up. And here's one more piece. I know I keep saying one more. One more piece I want to name before we close today's episode. I promise this is the last one. When you're the only or one of the few Latinas in the room, visibility feels different. It's not just what will they think of me? It's what will they think about all of us based on what I say. Finding this, reading about this, I was like, holy moly. Because research on something called stereotype threat, was pioneered by psychologist Claude Steele at Stanford, shows that this is real. When people are aware of negative stereotypes about their group, their performance suffers, not because of lack of ability, but because of the additional cognitive burden of worrying about confirming those stereotypes. One study found that Latino students chose easier problems when they were told a test measured mathematical ability, but not when the same test was framed as a simple problem solving exercise. Because what happened there is that the framing is what activated the threat. And the threat is what then moved the students to change their choices. And it's not paranoia. It's not that you are just like being paranoid. It's the reality of being in spaces when your presence is still considered exceptional. When you're just not representing yourself, but carrying the weight of the entire community you come from every time you open your mouth. Of course, your body learned to be careful about visibility because the stakes have always been higher. So here's where we are. Your visibility wound is real, and it makes sense. It makes sense because of Calladita culture, because the generations of conditioning that taught women like us to stay small. It makes sense because of intergenerational trauma, the way your parents' survival strategies became your nervous system default setting. It makes sense because of linguistic terrorism, the way your voice and accent have been policed and judged for generations. It makes sense because of code switching exhaustion, the cognitive load of constantly translating yourselves between worlds. And it makes sense because of stereotype threat, the weight of representing more than just yourself every time you speak. So we're not broken. We're simply protecting ourselves based on old information. Y ahora que no, bueno, we get to give our bodies new information. And this is what the 2 episodes from now are going to be all about. So you're going to be on the episode title part 1 and part 2, so you'll know which one it is. We don't do back-to-back episodes because we do an episode a guest in between. So 2 episodes from now, we're going to talk about a practice I call the first 3 minutes of visibility. And it's a way to build safety in your nervous system in small doses your body and you can actually handle. Because I believe confidence is not something you manufacture through willpower. I believe confidence is something that emerges when your nervous system feels safe and when you can teach your body that visibility can be safe, slowly, gently, and one micro moment at a time. Believe me, I've been doing this for 9 years and finally I feel like I can be visible. So I'm always my first project. So, if this episode resonated or if you recognize your visibility wound and what we talked about today, I would love for you to let me know. And I invite you to take the Calladita Culture quiz. So I have a quiz, cafecompam.com/quiz, where you can take the Calladita Culture quiz, uncover your wound, the one that's running your life at the moment. Because one thing I will say, healing begins on the other side of awareness. You cannot heal what you cannot name. If visibility is your wound, you're not alone. I'm right there with you, promise. And we're not broken. We're just learning, maybe for the first time, that being seen doesn't have to cost us our safety, because our truth is our medicine. And even when our voice shakes, even when our hands tremble, especially when your voice shakes, actually, that's probably really important to voice our truth and our power. Bueno, thank you so much, listeners, for being here. Sigue brillando. Café con Pam is created con mucho amor by our small but mighty team. Content production by Nancy Jaimes. Podcast management by Maru Linardi. Social media and marketing by Brenda Figueroa. And me, your host, Pam Covarrubias. To keep the cafecito brewing and the healing flowing, join the Supporters Club for only $5 a month and access early episodes, behind-the-scenes vibes, and exclusive minisodes you won't hear anywhere else. Screenshot this episode and tag me and share what resonated. I love seeing your takeaways. Follow on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let's keep the conversation going with us on social media at Café con Pan Podcast, because your voice always matters there. We love being on Instagram and Facebook. Gracias for listening to Café con Pan, a Spread Ideas Move People production. For more episodes, guest info, or resources, visit cafeconpam.com. And if you're healing from Calladita culture and don't know where to start, you can take the quiz. cafeconpam.com/quiz for Tia Wisdom and cariño just for you.
Sabrosura pa' ti que